everybody. It's the Quarantine Diaries here with Marie from Skeins. Today is, what is today? Monday, the 27th of April, day 33 of quarantine. And I'm so proud of ourselves, Peter. We have created the technology. We've got it here. I'm joined by Peter Chatterton, who many of you may know as one of our founders and my mentor at Skeins. I'm very pleased of us, Peter. We've done it. I've got you here. I've been determined to get you on because there is so much that we can talk about, and what you don't know about making yarn wouldn't fit on the back of a matchbook. So here we are.
Nobody knows everything.
No, nobody does know everything, but you certainly know a hell of a lot. So I thought it would be a really great opportunity for people today to meet Peter. And I thought we could just talk about, because you and I have been talking about dates off here, and we're coming up with and I can't believe it actually, because very, very soon we're coming up with our 10th anniversary at Skeins, which is, I don't know where that's gone, but I mean, Design Spun has now clicked over 34 years.
No, 36.
36. Oh, see, where's that? God, it only felt like yesterday that we were celebrating our 30th.
36 this year. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So.
Amazing.
So I thought this is the perfect time for everybody to meet you, because you introduced yourself into the Speakeasy for the first time last week. But I think it's really a really good time for everybody to see you in person, and you just talk a little bit about who you are, the history of the business, and and yarn.
Yarn. We can make yarn, and we can make stories, I suppose, can't we? As we used to say. I'll tell you a bit about myself first, and that started in Yorkshire in 1966, failing exams as lots of people do, saying I need a job, and off I trotted and found a job in a dye house, a commissioned dye house in Yorkshire, when we used to talk like, "Hey up lad, how are you?" And this company was known in the trade as a slubbing and top dyers. So we dyed slivers in tops, which is a form of package for the slivers. And that's when I started. And I went to Textile College in Halifax. And that progressed into another couple of positions in the trade, in the spinning trade rather than just dyeing trade. We were just dyeing fibre at that stage. And I worked for a few years for the largest carpet manufacturer in the world in those days, called Crossley's Carpets. And they had 3 different weaving sheds. They employed, I think it was in a region of 4,500 people. And I worked in one of their subsidiaries, which was spinning carpet yarn and texturizing filament yarns for upholstery and nylons and those kind of things in those days. But anyway, so I continued on through there, finished my work in England, in Leeds, in a vertical operation, which was a ladies' woven fabric mill. So we spun the yarn, that's where I was involved, and then it went through the weaving department. So that was ladies' fashion. And that was fascinating, because that was in the woolen industry, not the worsted industry, which we'll talk about later to give you a description, if you like, of the difference between the two. So it was probably around 1970, 72 that I must have got itchy feet. And I thought, there's got to be more than walking to work for 3 miles and getting soaked to the skin, and then drying out during your work time, and then walking home and get soaked to the skin going home. Or latterly, walking for a mile, catching a bus for 2 miles, catching a train to Leeds, and then walking another mile to get to work, and repeating the process coming back on the train, with the frequent travellers passes. Were all these lemmings, and I was one of them. The doors are open, the train pulls, and you dive off the train and you run like hell to get to your bus stop to catch your bus to go to work. My God. And I guess I could say there's got to be more to life than this. and I wrote to Australia House and Canada House and New Zealand House, the three embassies in London. And coincidentally, I can hear a dog. Coincidentally, it just so happened that it was the New Zealand Commission that replied back first after I said what my qualifications were and the potential of any jobs, any employment. And so that's 1973, probably by then, 1973. The list of jobs available in New Zealand in textiles was probably 3 A4 sheets of paper. So a lot, heck of a lot. The industry, the trade back then was considerably larger than it is today, sadly. And I applied to 5 different positions and secured one to a company or a business that was starting in Dannevirke, about an hour and a quarter, hour and a half south of us here. And they started in Dannevirke, thanks to a group of people, including farmers, who they already had a spinning mill in Dannevirke back in the 60s, and that disappeared. One of the best parts of New Zealand for the carpet trade is the east coast of the North Island. You've got the ideal wool on your doorstep. So we started that. I came out, emigrated after getting married 3 weeks before to a new wife, first wife, by the way.
Well, only wife.
Only wife still today, first and only wife. Right. And that blooming heck, that's 40. What is it? That's 46 years ago. So I've been married 46 years. Oh, bloody hell, that's a long time. Excuse my French. So anyway, we arrived in Dannevirke and built that mill there, or assisted to build it and then run it. And I looked after the raw materials. I looked after the early stage processing, and I looked after the finished goods. And that lasted for 5 years. When for 2 years before that 5-year period, I was looking after a customer's commission processing, and that was a group of farmers from the Perrendale Society, if you like. So they created a company called Perrendale Marketing, and we took some of their coarse Perrendale, which is probably, I'm going to guess and say, I can't remember now, 36 to 40 micron, used to be known as Carpet Master, and we made some carpet yarn. And then we took some of their Perrendale Hoggets, which are 32 micron, and we were processing that into hand knitting yarns. And that is the yarn that we still trade today, 36 years later. Oh, yeah, 34, 33 years later. So that Perrendale, genuine Perrendale, modified worsted yarn, non-combed, has been the flagship of this business since its inception by those group of Perrendale farmers. No questions? No questions, Marie. Marie's looking at me. So anyway, excuse me. So I joined this group of Perrendale farmers business, which was basically a marketing business, and they purchased some balling equipment, machinery and winding machinery, and I joined that group to look after that very small operation. So we used to, how funny. So we had 3 staff. We used to make the balls. We'd put the bands on the balls with sellotape, which nobody does anymore. And then you put the balls in the bags, and we all did that. Now that business took 4 years of doubling the business. So after 4 years, it was in a situation to consider building its own spinning mill, which is where I'm sat here today in Napier on the North Island of New Zealand. And we created and built this mill in 1984, and we acquired the services of, he's known as the Irishman, but his name is Ian Kelly, and he is an amazingly intelligent, knowledgeable man in this trade. Never in my 54 years in this industry have I met a man as knowledgeable and as widespread across all the sectors of textiles you can imagine. So we were fortunate in acquiring Ian, who arrived duly from Belfast in Ireland, and he arrived, and in due course the containers of machinery, which were all purchased out of Europe. The machinery arrived in a number of different containers, as you can imagine, for a spinning mill. Large machinery in spinning, very big. It isn't like a knitting frame where you can lift it with one forklift. These machines can be up to 60, 70 feet long, and quite a few tons in weight. So anyway, Ian stood there, I'll never forget this, and we all opened these containers. We had the building here, and we started emptying the containers. And as we took out each item, because textile equipment or spinning equipment needs to be dismantled, substantially dismantled, to make it handleable for people to move it and shift it onwards, etc. So he stood there, and he just stood there and said, yeah, that's off a spinning frame, that's off a twister, that's off the card, that's off a gill, that's off this machinery, that's off that. And we totaled all that equipment or parts to the various areas that were delegated for the building of those. And he built the machines with help from a variety of us. And he did complain, I might say, a number of times. He said to me, Chatterton, don't you ever shut up? Because he's a man of few words, but a deep thinker and a worker. And I was working, and I like to think I'm a worker, a grafter, but I like talking, I guess. So we're opposites, you might say. So anyway, he commissioned that, or we commissioned that plant in memory. I think it was April or May. He'll correct me on this. April or May in 1984, and we are still going today. So it was thanks to that group of farmers who had the vision, let's call it that, to take their wool off the farm and not just sell it through the standard wool chain to sale through brokers, etc., to take it to a further manufacturing to achieve the added values. And those added values were discussed by that group of farmers long before the likes of, say, Mike Moore, the Labour minister at the time, no, not at the time, later, talked about added values. So anyway, we started that. It was also the period in the world when China was first opening its eyes or opening its shoulders to be an export nation. And so timing was an interesting thing then, wasn't it? We did not see the impact of China for quite some years. I'm only going to say probably 5 or 6. So we kicked off this spinning mill and found it very difficult. As the years started moving on, so within 3 or 4 years, we found ourselves in a very difficult position financially. And the Chinese were starting to pour out into the world with the help of all the rest of the world, you might say. I won't get political today if I can help it. And so we went through a restructure, and that restructure happened probably late 80s, and we had a new owner come in to, let's say, assist the business's continuity. And no, I won't go into personalities, no. So there we are. We started there. So that was then the start of a company that we rechristened as Design Spun. And that was with that new owner. And that rolled on for quite some years. And we expanded the mill to increase our productivity, our production capabilities by yarn counts, to give us today, we can spin yarn from extremely fine, and have I got something to show you? Never thought about getting samples, Marie. Just a minute. Something very fine, for instance, like say, something about as fine as that. And this is one of the most common yarn counts across the world for the manufacturing industry of garments, hosiery, etc. That's known as what's known as a 224s worsted, which is a 228 metric, and I won't confuse you anymore, I suppose. Out to the thickest yarns that we can make, which are a roving yarn, as big as your thumb. So we've got today an absolutely massive a range of capabilities of yarn thicknesses as well as blends, because it was 5 years after we started the first company here that Ian acquired some mohair. By that stage, we were still basically using the Perendale for all of our production. We never touched merino back in those days. We didn't have the equipment for it. And he acquired some mohair, and off he went. And he fronted up in my office and he said, "What do you think of that?" And he held his yarn up, and I said, "My God, that's fantastic. You've got it." And what it made, we have the machines called wrap spinners. So I haven't even talked about the plant profile. So we make conventional ring spun yarns. That's a ring spun yarn that I just held up before. That's a ring spun yarn. The only thing that holds that yarn together in the singles of the yarn is the twist that you apply into the sliver. And here's Marie showing you the twist that you apply into a sliver, S-L-I-V-E-R, is the twist. And in our trade, you apply different amounts of twist depending on the end use application of the yarn that's wanted. So if it's for hand knitting, we put a certain amount of twist in. If it's for hosiery, it's all constructed around yarn development, yarn plants that have been around for years and years and years. So if you want hosiery, you put a bit more twist in. If you want then to go for weaving, you virtually double that twist. Because for weaving that you're going to be sitting on, upholstery, I'm thinking fabrics, you need to have it resist so many thousand rub tests. It's called the Martindale rub test. So the twist goes in there. So we were making that. Now the wrap yarn, and I should have been prepared. Stay there for 2 seconds. Stay there for 2 seconds. Here we are. I should have been prepared. Sorry about that. That is a wrap yarn. That's a boucle. This is an alpaca boucle. So wrap yarns are not held together by the twist in the sliver. They're held together by binders and cores, which allow overfeeds to happen, and you can make a variety, make slubs, you can make loops, you can make gimps, loops or boucles. The majority of what we make is boucles. That goes into the weaving industry for homewares like the brushed and loop rugs in mohair and in alpaca. So I'm waffling a bit here. Let me go back and kind of try and give you I'm going to give you a potted history, a walk through the mill from start to finish of the plant, the equipment. It starts, we must have any raw material has to come here in its scoured form. So we rely on scouring. Scouring is a trade term for washing, in simple terms. And if you took a sheep's wool, you're going to have an average 75% scour yield. So 25% of that fiber on the sheep, when it comes off the sheep, is grease, it's swints and other things, but it's let's call it wool grease with a little bit of lanolin, you might say. So if you take 1,000 kilos of greasy fiber off the farm and give it to the scour, you should get 750 kilos back. So we need that in here at a very, very low grease content of less than 0.5, 0.4%, 0.3%. And so that's very, very clean. If it's higher than that, it won't run on our equipment. So we blend it. That's when we open the fibers, and we open the fibers to gently untangle whatever's there that's in this dense mass of locks and clips and things like that. So we do that, we moisturize it, we put some oil on it to defeat the static that will occur through the machines once it starts processing, because it's running at quite high speeds on metal plates, causing static electricity. So we've blended it. We let it cure for 24 hours in a blend bin. Then we card it, and the carding is the first process that lays the fibers parallel. We're a worsted spinner. A worsted yarn is a yarn where all the fibers are laid parallel, very smooth. And so that machine, the carding machine, which is a huge machine, lays the fibers. And the way I describe it when we have visitors, it does this. And I don't have a comb here. I don't have any hair. That's why. I describe it as it's like coming out the shower, put a comb through your hair. What are you doing? You're parallelizing, laying all your hair, all the fibers together in one direction. Then we put it through a set of machines that start to refine that sliver that we have produced. So we use what's called doublings. So if you have one sliver there, which way am I going? There's one sliver. We take multiple slivers and we put them through the machines at the feed end, and we deliver out the far end one of those slivers, the same thickness, you might say, but 5 times the length in simple terms. And we repeat that process, refining the sliver all the way through 4 or 5 times, so that the sliver is then ready to present to the spinning frame. So by now you've gone through 1, 2, that's 9. You've probably gone through 12 different machines in those 4 or 5 processes, 6 processes to get to, because we have multiple machines, to get to the spinning frame. The spinning frame, they're known as ring spinning frames, and that's simple because there's a ring that the spindle sits inside. There's a ring that the spindle sits inside, and there's a spindle. There's a spindle, and the machine starts. The spindles start turning, and there's a ring that runs up and down, and that guides the sliver, which is by then a spun yarn, through the twists applied on the spinning frame. That's all the thing that a spinning frame does, is it impart twist into a sliver and drawing it out, which is called drafting. So whether I'm being too technical for you all, I don't know, but I'll just keep on briefly to the stage where it's in its finished form, twisted and ready to go to be finished, if you like. So basically that's quite simple. The key to the spinning industry and the worsteds, the key is all before the spinning. That's your preparing those different ends I told you, the slivers that go in, to make the most even sliver so that you don't have thick and thin. So the silk purse versus sow's ear concept all happens in that preparing. You put it on a spinning frame and it's not right, you've got to go back and repair it. That doesn't happen for us very much at all. We stand by our product, we always have, and we take pride in our product, and I think we produce as good a yarn as anyone else in the world. So after spinning, it becomes a bit secondary. You twist it a number of ends. You want a 2-ply, you want a 2-fold, not 2-ply. You want a 2-fold, you put 2 ends together. You want a 3-fold, you want 3 ends together. You want a 4-fold, it's 4 ends. Simple as that. Now those ends, for all you knitters in knitting land, don't bear a lot of relation to ply, because the plies that we all talk about, 1-ply, 2-ply, 4-ply, 8-ply, 6-ply, Aaron 10 ply, Chunky 14 ply. That they all relate to number of stitches that ply will achieve on a certain needle size. So plies and counts. Counts is for the industry. That's for us. Counts are for us what the industry needs to know. Many times, talking with customers or potential customers, somebody says to us, "We want some yarn." Okay, so what kind of yarn do you want? We're not sure. What ply do you want? Do you want an 8 ply? What's the end product use? Oh, it's for hand knitting. Well, I'm going to guess now because I haven't checked this out for a long time. 60% of the market in New Zealand will be 8 ply. That's the biggest sector. And it does have waves of popularity of different things. Like for the last 5, 6, 8 years, there's been some of the thickest yarns you've ever seen. They've started to go a little bit out of vogue now, I think, Marie. So we can analyze what anybody wants to work together. And we're doing that right now with a new inquiry, actually, out of Australia. And we're going to develop something together with them. That's why we called ourselves Design Spun that many years ago, because we are ready to design a yarn for you if you want to be a customer of ours. And we do a lot more commission processing that we've developed and encouraged with growers, with farmers, on alpaca, on mohair, on coarse crossbreds, on half-breds, on fine merinos. And it's the origins of our business. That's what those Perrendale farmers 36 or 40 years ago for me, 40 years ago started in Dannevirke to get the added value. Now we're sharing that concept and that prospects and that potential with a lot more growers, and it's marvelous. So what they're achieving better returns than if they just went through the standard wool pipeline, I guess you might say. So where am I going from here? It was probably the mid 80s, no, rubbish, late 80s, as I said earlier, late 80s, where we expanded enlarged our capacity from those yarns I just showed you. So that allowed us to sell to a much broader range of customers or the trade, from fine gauge knitwear out to the coarse gauge knitwear, out to the various sock manufacturers, hosiery. And by the early 90s, we were probably 33% export, the majority of which, of course, was into Australia, which to me is basically just, it's easy to sell into Melbourne, or it used to be, than did the South Island, because your freight costs were cheaper. And in Melbourne, of course, back in those good old days, there was over 400 manufacturing companies. I doubt there'd be 30 today. In New Zealand, we had probably, those days, we'd probably have 60. Well, if I started at the top of the North Island and went to the bottom of the South Island, I don't think we'd have, or we wouldn't have 30. Oh, nowhere near 30. Be more like 20. We've seen our business polarize very much with the change in the world, with cheap imports coming from China. The reason we took on that new equipment to spin those finer yarns was to try and stay one step ahead of the Chinese, which is damn difficult. And that's what caused us to eventually, in the 90s, to restructure this whole place and downsize it, which was one of the most awful times that any of us. By that stage, there were 3 of us. We took the business over from that company that came to rescue us, you might say. So it was Ian Kelly, the Irishman I mentioned, Brendan Jackson, who's our financial man, computer man, etc., etc., and general manager, and myself, we came to that point where we had to restructure. Can't get this camera working properly. We had to restructure and make some redundancies. The most horrible time that we three had ever been through. That secured our continuation at a much lower level. And by then, we were probably 15 years old, something like that. And we went through a second phase to downsize the operation more. By the time we downsized that second time, we were one of only 3 worsted mills left in New Zealand. We today are the only worsted mill left in New Zealand, and have been so for probably the last 4 years, possibly something like that. So we survived those ups and downs and the peaks and troughs, call them what you like. It wasn't easy. We continue and have never stopped thinking what's next, and that's on yarn development. What's new? The trade, the industry, the fashion industry wouldn't exist across the whole world if people didn't sit there and say, right, what's next? What's the next color story? What's the next textural story? What's the next application? And things like that. So that, and it's like any fashion, it's like homewares fashion, it's like paints and whatever else. You've got to keep thinking ahead and keep developing as much as you can. So from there, as Marie said when we started this conversation, we are 10 years old of our first sale on skein, in skeins, with skeins, on the 9th of May, the day before my 70th birthday. I shouldn't have thrown that in, but there you go. And it was Marie who I got a call from our reception, coincidentally my wife. Mary was in the shop that day in reception, and Mary said to me, there's a lady in this shop that you might like to talk to. So I waltzed down to the shop and met Marie, and we came and sat down together, and that was the start of a 14-year relationship. Come on, I'm going the wrong way. The start. No, I can't hear you. No, sorry. I'm looking at Marie, and she's looking at me and she's talking, but I can't hear her. Hear her. So that was the start of the development of our online business. And in total frankness, that was developed or started because the one downside of the product that we produce is very seasonal. In a place like New Zealand, it's seasonal, far less in other parts of the world. So it's a winter hobby, craft, etc., not a summer. Because as soon as the sun shows its face and the warmth comes in, Kiwis want to be out in the gardens, doing their gardening, etc., etc. Other parts of the world have more of a 10, 11-month season. So we started skeins specifically to target the downside. So for 30 odd years, or kind of far less than that, for 20, let's say 22, 23 years, we had that seasonality. So the season starts in New Zealand, Australia, used to February, starts to wind down in August, September. So you get 6 months of a shot of the main part of the season. So we started skeins to attack and service the Northern Hemisphere markets, if we could. Now, we've been going 10 years. We do have some reasonable Northern Hemisphere export sales into all sorts of different countries, but the majority of our sales at this stage are still NZ. We will be looking to open our shoulders more into the Northern Hemisphere as the years come forward towards us. So I've waffled on a lot, and I don't know, I could keep talking, but I don't think I should. Should I keep talking, Marie? What yarns? Oh, hang on. She's holding a. Take that back a bit. What yarns excite you? What yarns excite you? Well, I walk through this mill every day of my life, and I wander around and I look at the yarns. I look at the yarns look at the fibre in the preparing and the slivers. I look at the yarns in the spinning frame. I stand there and watch the frame with all the ends spinning down, and I get a buzz. I get a buzz out of some of those things. I really do. I'm also um, stricken with the fact that I seem to be able to see a little fault somewhere. I don't know why, but it's not because you've been around a long time, and I go, oh, that's not quite right. Track it back, talk to the people, see what we can do just to sort something out. But what yarns excite me? The day that Ian Kelly brought that boucle mohair into my office, I just said, wow, man, you've got it. Because what that was a yarn that was historically made mostly in Scotland, get these right, mostly in Scotland, by very well respected spinning companies that were turned into homewares, and there was your boucle mohair to go into the brush rugs, the tartans and those types of things. And we have a customer here in New Zealand who produces the same products today and has been doing so for the last 30 years, and they're as good as any other you will find in the world. What excites me with our yarns, one major is going into retail where your yarn has been knitted into a garment or into a sock and looking at the product in its finished form. I just wish that we could take all our staff somewhere and say, look, guys, but I've shown them pictures and we talk about things like that. We have some regular staff meetings and keep the team abreast of where we are. We've got the best team, even though it's smaller than it used to be. Back in the day when, before we went through that horrible downsize, we had about 85 staff. Today we have, including Skeins, today we have about 33 staff. So we're a lot less, we have a smaller footprint of our plant and our buildings, but we are far more productive than we were back in the old days when we had 3 shifts, which were rather a nightmare. Come forward. Hang on. Marie's, I can't see it, Marie. Sorry. Oh, yes. There's a question from Marie. And we've all been sat here for 5 weeks, thinking where we're at. I've been in this place with Yvonne, our production manager, for the last week, rejigging all our production schedules and the dye house and everything else, and we fire up tomorrow. Thank God for that. Our opinion is that during the lockdown, New Zealand businesses were not allowed to trade. That we closed all manufacturing, which is fair enough, but online we started online in the lockdown period of COVID, but then we were required to close because it wasn't deemed as an essential product or service. What happened then, let me just quickly share with you all, is that companies in Australia where the businesses weren't manufacturing, wasn't closed down, Spotlight, a very large craft retailer chain stores, they've been shipping online orders into New Zealand for the whole time that we've been locked down. So I'll answer Marie's question now. Post-COVID, I think the product of hand knitting is an ideal pastime, if you want to call it that, a hobby or craft, to keep a lot of people occupied and with some final rewards of things to wear, things. We donate cartons of yarn every year to a variety of groups, including the local prison, where some of their inhabitants, guests, are knitting for their family. So we donate baby yarn. We donate baby yarn to groups who are knitting um, tops for prem babies and hats and things like that. So the product and the craft and the final result, and it's apart from some small percentage of technical nylon filaments we use to hold some of the wrap yarns together, we are 100% natural. And that's, I didn't go through this with you all. I did say the wools. So we go coarse wools, medium wools, fine wools. We go fine baby alpaca, standard alpaca. We go mohair, we go kid mohair. We're just developing a new yarn for superfine kid mohair, which you will see on skeins in probably now. Probably going to take us 3 months to get it out there. We use possum, which is an incredible fiber, very, very fine, very 13 micron, something like that. We use silk blends. And when we use silk blends, of course, silk is a cellulose, which you may know, whereas wool is a protein. So the silk doesn't dye with wool dyes, it cross stains. So that creates a reasonably interesting result. So post-COVID, I think our craft and our products are in a good position to take them forward with everybody who wants to involve. I'm an insomniac. I woke up this morning at 5 o'clock. I open my iPad and I start reading, and I fell across this story or this site of two girls, and they are young ladies, millennials, something like that. Can't remember the name of the site. And they were talking and saying exactly that. They're the new millennials who, or two of the new millennials, who are taking the knitting to their contemporaries to show them that it's not an old fuddy-duddy thing, that it can be done by anybody, and you get reward for it, you get therapeutics for it, you get everything that is. It's a good feeling. I can't think of the right word. It's a good feeling. You complete something, you get a buzz out of it, no matter what it is, I guess. And I'm running out of words now. After that, anything else we should add, or I could add, Marie? She's madly writing. Oh, behind me, can you see one of my favorites is antiques, because I'm now 70. I'm an antique as well, but I still do this. There you go. I'm waiting. We're all waiting for the golf courses to be reopened because we're frustrated as anything. So anyway, hang on. Marie's just talking. I don't want to detain you too much longer. No, just writing. Sorry. Here we go. Come on. What's your favorite fiber to spin and why? What's your favorite fiber to spin and why? I'll be careful here, because if I say one fiber and some of our commission customers or suppliers see it, they could take umbrage about that against their fiber we're doing. I can share this with you as a bit of a tongue in cheek. We have met, Ian and I have met many people in the last 36 years in New Zealand and in Australia who say, we've got this and it's the best, and I'm not going to describe what type of fiber it is. It is the best of these fibers that has ever been seen. And we say, well, what makes you say that? They say, because somebody told me. Well, we need to look at it and analyze it. Every fiber has got an end use. Just take coir, which is the coconut mats. That's a big, horrible thing, but there's an industry made out of it. Jute, hemp, just the world of textiles is, I call it a never-ending story, because it starts there and it goes, it just never stops. So my favorite type of fiber, I have got a buzz out of a couple of fibers that we've played with early in the piece, and that was cashmere, and the other one was